Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Bava Daf Tzuri, and we're starting about 12 lines or so from the bottom of the page. We've been discussing Takanas Usha. You may recall from yesterday that Takanas Usha was listed at the bottom of Pei Tes Amud Aleph, and the language of Takanas Usha over there was basically, was it Pei Tes Amud Aleph? Was the bottom of the previous page, Peches Amud Beis, where Takanas Usha was Ha'isha Shemachra B'nichsei Melug, that if a woman sells the properties that she brought into the marriage, while she has access to the principal, the husband has rights to the payros. So if she does so b'chaye baila umesa, the din is habal motzi miyad lekuchos, that a husband is able to maintain rights after her death. He can recollect the principle of the nichsei melug that she gave away. That is takanas usha. So here we're going to see that there is potentially a machlokes tanaim about it. So 12 lines from the bottom on Pei Tes Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Lemar, perhaps we can say takanas usha tanoihi, that maybe takanas usha, the applicability of Takanas Usha is a machlokes tanaim. Namely, some people say we have Takanas Usha. She's really not supposed to sell the nichsei melug, the properties that she brought into the marriage. But if she does, because of Takanas Usha, the husband can go recollect those items that she sold. And there are those who hold that there is no Takanas Usha, where the husband does not have the right to go back and collect what she sold, and therefore the sale is final. And where do we see these two different shitas? So we see that it's a tanoi. The tanicha, the one brisa says that avdei malug, if a woman brings into the marriage an eved, so she owns the eved, but the eved can work for the husband. If it's avdei malug, then yotzin b'shein v'ayin leisha, then the only time he goes free with a tooth injury or an eye injury is if the woman, the actual owner, causes the damage. Avalo leish, but if her husband, who only has the rights to the payros and not to the principal itself, causes the damage, the eved will not go free. V'tanya idach, and there's another brisa, and this other brisa is the opposite of the previous one. Says the Gemara, lo leish v'lo leisha, no one, not the husband or the wife, could cause the kind of damage to this eved who is part of the malug, part of the monies that the wife brought into the marriage, where the husband has the rights to the payros and the wife has the rights to the principal. No one can injure this eved in a way where he would go free. So this is the two sides of the possible machlokes, the Gemara's presentation, as to whether or not we hold of Takanas Usha. And the Gemara says 10 lines from the bottom on Pei Tes Amud Beis, Savruha, we might have thought up until this point that Tekule Alma Kinyan Peros Lav Ke Kinyan Guftami. We might have thought that the husband's rights to the Peros of the Nichsei Melug are different and distinct from her rights to the actual principle of the Nichsei Melug. And my lav b'hakamiflage, perhaps over here, if we're under the assumption that Kinyan Peros is lav ki Kinyan agufta, then what's the machlokas between these two brisas about? Says the Gemara, demanda amar leisha lesle takanas usha, according to the one who says that only the wife's injury of the eved would free the eved and not the husband's. So that means that she still has full rights over the Nichsei Melug. That sounds like the opinion of no Takanas Usha. Umanda Amar Lo Leish V'Lo Leisha, and according to the other brisa, which indicates that neither the wife or the husband can damage this eved in a way where he will go free, that implies that Islay Takanas Usha, that they both still have some ownership over the eved. So therefore, it's possible that this is a machlokas, says the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom, low. That's not correct. The kule alma, really everybody holds is lehu takanas usha. Everyone agrees to takanas usha that a husband maintains rights to the nichsei melug, to the properties that she brought into the marriage. Everybody maintains those rights. Ella kan kodem takana kan la'achar takana. One brisa, the brisa that seems to indicate that there's no Takanas Usha was before Takanas Usha was instituted. It didn't always exist. It's not a pasuk in Chumash. It's a rabbinic injunction that allows for a husband to maintain ownership over the Nichsei Melug. So one brisa, the second brisa was from prior to Takanas Usha, and the first brisa was after Takanas Usha was instituted. Another possible answer is idi la'achar takana. Really, both brisas are speaking about a time after which Takanas Usha was implemented. The islahu Takanas Usha. Everyone agrees to it. Why is it that we have a shita where the woman is able to cause damage to an eved such that he will grow free, but her husband could not cause such damage? My timer. Rava. That's because of Rava. The Amar Rava, as we turn to the top of Tzadi Amud Aleph, Rava says, Hekdesh chametz v'shichror, there are a few things, if I'm makdish something, or if Pesach kicks in and that item becomes chametz, or shichror, if I free something, mafkiin midei shibud, they are no longer begeder a shibud. So therefore, says the Gemara, that according to the sheet of Leisha v'lo leish, she always will maintain a certain kind of special connection to the Nechsei Melug because she owns the principle. Says the Gemara, maybe the Braisas actually disagree about Rava. Lema, perhaps we should say the Rava Tanoihi. This sheet of Rava, the top line of Tzadi Amud Aleph, should be a question of Hektesh Chametz v'Shich, or do we say Mafkin Lidei Shibud? We've seen this line many times in Shas. It looks like 5 or 6 times already. Let's see, twice in Yevamos, once in Ksubis, once in Gittin, and once in Nedarim. And now again here in Bava Kama. So maybe we should say that this line is subject to a machlokes. The Gemara says, "Lo, the kule alma islahu de Rava." Everyone agrees about Rava. V'hacha, over here, referencing the second brisa, al muha rabban l'shihabuda debal. What the Chachamim did is they gave more strength to the husband's claim to the nichsei malug, and that's why neither he or she, if they injured the avdei malug, would they go free. Another possible answer on the top of Tzadi Amud Aleph, 5 lines down. Takanas Usha. Nobody had heard of Takanas Usha. V'hacha bekinyan peiros kikinyan haguf kamiflige. That really the machlokes is about whether or not we say that the peiros of the nichsei malug and the nichsei malug itself are inextricably bound. According to the first brisa, they are not inextricably bound. She can function with the nichsei malug and he can function with the peiros. According to the second brisa, they are inextricably bound. So a bunch of various ways to try and answer up for the differences between these two brisas that we saw toward the bottom of Pei Tesam and Beis, and that brings us to the words uviplugta dahani tanoi, this where we're 8 lines down or so, that this machlokes about peiros kekinyan haguftami or not is actually a machlokes tanoi. And here's what the brisa says to Tanya. The brisa writes, we'll see this again in Bava Basra, hamocher avdo la'acher, if I sell my slave to another person, upasakimo, and when I sell my slave to you, I rehire the eved back, upasakimo al Manah sheyeshamshenu shloshim yom. So let's say that I try to sell you my eved, Tevi, we'll pick the one from Shas, Tevi Avdo. So I sell Tevi to you. He's a $10,000 eved. I pay you $10,000, but I barter with you that in the sale, I get to keep him for the next 30 days. During those 30 days, when you officially own him, but I'm still using him, I knocked out one of his teeth, or I poked out his eye. So what happens? Rav Meir Omer, Rishon Yeshno Bedin Yomo Yomayim Ibnei Shu Tachtav. The Torah has a chiddush when it comes to the world of an eved, that only in the first 24 hours are you responsible if only within the first 24 hours of your ownership are you responsible for the eved and the ayin. If it's more than that, then no. So the Gemara says, if Rishon, if I, the seller, was the one who injured him, then the din of Yomo Yomayim, the exclusion, the kula that applies by an eved applies over here because he's in my house. Kasavar, he must hold that kinyan peiros ke kinyan aguftami, because over here, the sale itself is that I sold to you, I gave you $10,000, that's considered like the actual principle of the nechsei malug. And the right that I built into the contract that I get the eved for 30 days is like the peiros. So over here we see that it's all like Rishon, it's all like the first person. So the peiros are the same. Kasavar, kinyan peiros ke kinyan haguftami. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no. Sheni yeshno bedin yomo yomayim neshu kaspo. The second person has this din of yomo yomayim because he actually owns the person. Kasavar kinyan peiros lav ki kinyan haguftami. So we see that this is a machlokas tanaim that plays out in regards to the case of mocher avdo la'acher. But Rabbi Yossi adds in a third shita. Rabbi Yossi Omer. Rabbi Yossi says shnehem yeshnon bedin yom o yomayim. They both have the din of yom o yomayim. Zem ipnei shehu kaspo. And the Gemara says about Shitas Rabbi Yossi, Misafka le kinyan peros iki kinyan aguftami ilav ki kinyan aguftami v'safek nefashos lahakel. He says that when we're dealing with a case of the of mocher avdo, so the din is that we don't know if kinyan peros is like kinyan haguftami. We just don't know. So we in our Gemara we presented the two brysas, at least one iteration of the two brysas from the bottom of Pei Testament Beis, is that the two of them, the two brysas, were really a machlokes about whether or not we say kinyan peros is kinyan aguftami. We saw that those two shitas in this brisa, and then we saw this new mechudash shita of Rabbi Yossi, which was misafkale. He wasn't sure, and he says v'safek nefashos lahakel. Now let's see the fourth shita in this brisa. The Gemara says about halfway down on Tzadi Amud Aleph, Rabbi Elazar Omer Shneim Einam Bedin Yom O Yomayim Zelafi She'eno Tachta V'Zelafi She'eno Kaspo. Nobody really owns this guy. It's Twilight Zone, because on the one hand there is money that transacted, but the eved is not where he should be. The eved is not with the person who owns him. So therefore he says that nobody is shaykh to that thing. All right. So let's now analyze this brisa. Amar Rava, my time of Rabbi Eliezer. Why does Rabbi Eliezer say that there is no ownership of this person at all? Because Amar Kra, ki kaspohu, this eved is like your money. Kaspo hamiyuchad lo. It has to be a case of kesef that's miyuchad, where the eved is actually dedicated to one person. But here he's not kaspo miyuchad, because on the one hand you own him. You paid me for him. You gave me the cash, but the eved's in my property, so that's like a stira minei ubei. And therefore, there's no din of payment in that case. Keman azahada amar ameimar. And who is the following case of ameimar like? Let's see who it aligns with. Says the Gemara, ish v'isha shemachro b'nichsei melug. You have a husband and a wife, and the wife tries to sell the nichsei melug, lo asu v'lo klum. Nothing transpired. Keman, who's that like? Ki Rabbi Eliezer. Because Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that shneim einon bedin yomo yomayim, because she really owns the principal and he has access to the payros. And similarly, as we head toward the Mishna on the bottom of Tzadi Amud Aleph, Man Tana Lahadatanu Rabbanon, who's the author of the following brisa, Mishachetzio Eved v'chetzio ben chorin. If you have a person who's a half Eved and half ben chorin, and that happens in a case where there are two owners of a person, of an Eved, and one person is Mishacher, that half of the Eved. So the person is a half and half. V'chein Eved shel shnei shutvin, or if an Eved who is a full Eved, but he's owned by two people, Ein yotzin b'roshe evarim she'einon chozer. If he has a part of a limb that's cut off and it's permanent, he doesn't go free. Why? Because at the end of the day, he's not meyuchad. He's owned by multiple people. Amar le Rav Mordechai le Rav Ashi hachi Amar Mishmei de Rava Rabbi Eliezer. This is the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, because after all, Milo Amar Rabbi Eliezer kaspa hamiyuchad lo achanami avdo hamiyuchad lo. So in a case where an eved is owned by multiple people, or if you have a case of chatzi eved chatzi ben chorin, and I'm one of the owners and you're one of the owners, so if I damage my my eved in such a way where he otherwise would have gone free, he doesn't go free here because it's not avdo hamiyuchad lo. That brings us to the next Mishnah on the bottom of Tzadi Amud Aleph. 6 lines from the bottom, the Mishnah says, "Hatzokeh lechavero," one who injures a person's ear. Machlokes Rishonim here. If you take a look at Rashi, he quotes the two shitas. Hikahu al azno, hitting the ear. You damage physically his ear. Lashon mori. Lishna acharina tokea mamish. One is that you literally hurt the person's ear, physical damage. The other is that you blew a horn in the person's ear and injured their ear that way. So says the Gemara, no sein lo sela. This person gets paid a sela. Rabbi Yehuda Omer mishum Rabbi Yossi haglili mana. He gets much more. He gets a mana. Says the Gemara, sitro. If you get smacked across the face, no sein lo masayim zuz. That might be worthwhile for a little bit of cash. You get slapped across the face with an open hand. The halacha is masayim zuz. La'achar yado. If you get hit with the back of the hand, then no sein lo arba meos zuz. I thought that was like a new, like out of the movies. Like if you get hit with the back of your hand, that's considered a bigger bizayon, and you get more money out of the deal. It's a shas thing, apparently. I don't know. I'm not Italian, and my parents didn't hit me, so I don't really know. But the Gemara here does say that the open slap is 200 zuz, and the backhanded slap is 400 zuz. Fascinating. Who knew? Tzaram be'ozno, if I pull down your ear. Talash besaro, if I pull down your hair. Rakak v'higia baroko, if somebody spits at you and the saliva actually reaches your flesh, or a heavier taliso mimenu, or if you remove someone's clothing in a public space, or para rosha isha bishuk, or you uncover a woman's hair in the marketplace, we have to take out the word lo, no sein arba meos zuz. The punishment in all of these cases, the financial punishment, is you have to pay 400 zuz. That brings us to the top of Tzadi Amid Beis. Mir Hashem will be going to the top of Tzadi Aleph, Amid Aleph, about 10 lines down to the 2 dots. Let's continue learning. The Mishnah continues, Zeh haklal, hakol lefi kvodo. This is a little cryptic. What does it mean, hakol lefi kvodo? And Rashi over here tells us a little foreshadowing. Rashi says, Dibur hamaschil zeh haklal, b'gmar mefarish kula hi o chumra. We don't know if this is a leniency or if this is a stringency, and that's something that we'll have to look into later in the Gemara, not today. Amar Rabbi Akiva, afilu anim shebe Yisrael. When we are assessing how much a person needs to get paid when they are embarrassed, even the poorest person in Israel, Roam Osam, we see that person ki'ilu heim b'nei choren, as though they're free. Sheyardu minichseihem, they're free, wealthy people who lost their property. Shehem b'nei Avram, Yitzchak, v'Yakov. Meaning, the bar starts high. We assume that everyone is a chashuv yid, even if they're a peasant. We treat them as though they're a chashuv yid. U'maisa be'echad shepara rosha isha b'shuk. Crazy story. A man uncovered a woman's hair in the shuk, and she was obviously embarrassed. She normally covers her hair. Bas lifnei Rabbi Akiva, v'chayvo litin la'arba meos zuz. Per our Mishnah, on the bottom of Tzadi Amud Aleph, the Mishnah says that if a man uncovers a woman's hair, he's obligated to pay 400 zuz. Right? This is like an ABC, T-ball. This is easy. Went to Rabbi Akiva, he said, Shteit in Shulchan Aruch. There was no Shulchan Aruch, but Shteit in Shulchan Aruch that you have to pay 400 zuz. Amar lo, the guy, the guilty party who had pulled off her tichel, he said, Rebbe, tain lizman, give me a little bit of a time before I have to pay. And the reason he did this is because he wanted to show that this woman had no problem having her hair uncovered. He knew. So here was the subterfuge. V'nasan lo zman. Rabbi Akiva said, okay, you can have 30 days to pay, whatever the amount of time is. So this guy who had initially pulled off her tichel and was chayv arba meos zuz, shamra omedes al pesach chatzera. He saw that she was standing at the opening of her chatzer. V'shavar es hakad b'faneha. He walks by and drops an earthenware pitcher in front of her. Ubo ki'isar shemen. And inside that container there was a little bit of oil. So what did she do when she saw the oil? It was common in those days for women to take oil to make their hair look pretty, to make their hair shine a little bit. So Gilsa es Rosha, she revealed her hair, mitpachas, and she absorbed water onto her, the oil onto her hand. So she would touch the oil, like if you can imagine there's oil, and you just take a full hand and gently touch the oil, your whole hand will have oil on it. So that's what the word, it's from the phrase in Shas, tofech al manasta hatfiach, when there's absorption. In some chemistry books I've seen when I was in college, it's adsorption, AD. Adsorption is to hold a liquid on your skin, on the outside of your skin. It's not, I got a cup of water here. The water on the outside is adsorbed. It's hanging off my finger. It's not absorbed. So the oil was sitting on her fingers, and she took it and she put it in her hair. Oh, the sneaky guy had 2 Adam sitting there. The Adam saw that she took off her own shetel, that she took off her own tichel. Rabbi Akiva.
This is the rule. Even if she doesn't care, the rule is the rule.
Read on. Read on. Amar lo, the guy who
had a good Mishna couple.
Yeah, this is a Mishna kaf. Yeah. So Amar lo, the guy who had initially pulled off the tichel, he was upset. Amar lo, he goes back to Beis Din on the day of payment, and he says to Rabbi Akiva, "Lezu ani no sein dalad meo zuz." This woman, you're charging me 400 zuz for taking off her shetel. She took off her own shetel in public. That's not. She's not keeping the din. But if she's not keeping the din, how could you be mechayev me 400 zuz if she's not keeping it? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, one thing doesn't have to lead to the other thing.
Says the Mishnah, like Michael Amar le, Rabbi Akiva says back to this guy, Lo amris klum. You have said nothing. After all, hachovel be'atzmo, if you damage yourself, or the equivalent in this case, if you do something usher, if you reveal your hair when you shouldn't, so afal pisha eno rishoi, potter, but hachovel, but acherim shechavlu bo chayavim. Doesn't make a difference. You can't do what's wrong. The fact that she doesn't care that you did it doesn't matter. That's the din. And if she brings you to Beis Din and you had really violated halacha and that you pulled off her tichel, You could be a woman who doesn't normally cover her hair at all, but under these circumstances, you pulled off her tichel, 400 zuz. Rabbi Akiva says she's doing something wrong in the other cases, but you as a yid are not allowed to pull off her tichel. It's not right. And similarly, another example, one who is cutting down saplings, small fruit trees, which you're not allowed to do. We know that there are discussions like this in poskim. If you are moving into a house and there's a fruit tree, you're not supposed to cut down fruit trees. Fine. So what about a kotetz netiyosov? Afal pish en or shoy pater, but acherim chayavim. You do it to your own house. Okay, you don't have to pay yourself your pater. But if other people damage your fruit tree, so then they owe you money. So Rabbi Akiva doubles down. It's interesting. Kotetz netiyosov is an interesting example. Why did the Gemara need to give two examples? Mirza Hashem, I'm not sure if the Gemara discusses this. We'll find out. I have no idea. Also, Kotetz benetios is the famous Gemara about Rabbi Akiva. So I always wonder if these Gemaras are like Avar nichnasu lepardes, right? End of Mishna. We are a quarter of the way down on Sadi Amud Bezel. Just physically a very long amud. It looks like more lines than usual on this page. Let's continue. In our Mishnah, we had spoken about in the beginning of our Mishnah that if you're tokeh lechavero, we had said you have to give a sela. Rabbi Yehuda said you have to give a manah. But there's multiple kinds of manahs, right? You have a Canadian quarter and an American quarter. They're not the same. But says the Gemara over here, manah Tzuri tnan, o manah Medina tnan. Take a look at Rashi, 7 lines down, Dibur Hamaschil Manah Tzuri. Manah Tzuri is Kaf Hey slime, which is Kovzuz. Manah Medinis is Shminis Shebimana Tzuri. It's an eighth. So it would be $12 relative to $100 approximately. 8 times 12 is 96. Let's call it $12.50. Huh? Yeah, 12 and a half, exactly 12 and a half. Yeah. So if you got a math guy in the room, I'm sorry. I'm not a math guy. So the Gemara wants to know when Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah says manah, did he mean 100 or did he mean 12 and a half? We don't know what he meant. The Gemara says, Tashma dehu gavra de takale lechavre. There was a man who did this injury. Again, back to Rashi's point, we don't know if it was physical harm or just a loud sound. Also, the comment Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, they went to Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, which is the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, not to be confused. He lived 2 generations later. He was an Amora and not a Tana. Amar leha ana ha Rabbi Yossi Haglili. He said, Ha'ana, I am me. He said, we'll figure out what this means. Ha'ana, and Ha Rabbi Yossi Haglili, Havle Manah Tzuri. In that case, he was talking about a Manah Tzuri. The Manah Tzuri was the larger amount of money, where the Manah meant 100 and not 12 and a half. Shmamina Manah Tzuri Tanan Shmamina. What was this cryptic phrase? My Ha'ana, Ha Rabbi Yossi Haglili. So the Gemara presents 2 different possibilities. We're about halfway down on Sadi Amud Beis. The Gemara says, that this is really what was said, that ha'ana dechazisach, I'm the one who saw you, Rabbi Yossi Haglili damar Manah Tzuri, and Rabbi Yossi, I was the witness, Rabbi Yossi Haglili was the one who paskin Manah Tzuri, and therefore, zil havla Manah Tzuri, that you should there give him the money. Then if it's ha'ana dechazisach, if that's true, then lememra, this leaves an implication that de'ed naaseh dayan, because he was both judge and jury. He was the one who witnessed what happened. Say I saw it, and then I turned around and became your dayan. Do we say eid naaseh dayan, that a witness can also function as a dayan? And you could understand already out of the gate, you could understand why there's a conflict of interest, because you already know the psak. There aren't 2 sides. You saw what happened. So what kind of judge are you? Are you allowed to be a dayan if you were an aid? Do we say that aid is naaseh dayan or not? And if that's the implication, then v'hatanya, we have a brisa that seems to say differently. Sanhedrin shero echad shahara nefesh. The whole Sanhedrin was sitting in the room, and a murder took place in the lishkas hagazis. Everybody witnessed it. Miktsas nasu edim, u'miksasa nasu edim, u'miksasa nasu dayanim. The room splits because everybody saw it. The left half of the room, people 1 through 60. They all sit on one side, and 61 through the rest until 120. They all decided that they would be the dayanim. Rabbi Kiva Omer klum edim heim ve'ein eid naaseh dayan. Nobody's edim. Nobody's allowed to do anything because ein eid naaseh dayan. So says the Gemara, perhaps we should say that our Gemara has an implication that's very difficult, because if our Gemara implies that eid is naaseh dayan, Rabbi Kiva doesn't hold that way. And Rabbi Tarfon, even in Rabbi Tarfon's case, It wasn't aid naaseh dayan. The Eidim were Eidim and the Dayanim were the Dayanim. The Dayanim weren't functioning as Eidim. They were just paskening the Shiloh. And says the Gemara, Ad Kamar lo Kamar Ad Kan lo Kamar Rabbi Tarfon el de Miktsasa Nasu Eidim u Miktsasa Nasu Dayan. Even Rabbi Tarfon, he wasn't saying that Ein Eid Naaseh Dayan. About Eid Naaseh Dayan lo Kamar. Rabbi Tarf. I think I skipped a line. Ad Kan lo Kamar Rabbi Tarfon el de Miktsasa Nasu Eidim u Miktsasa Nasu Dayanim. There, even in Rabbi Tarfon's case, we don't have half of the people doing both. The people who are testifying. The people who are the dayanim are the dayanim. But there's no ein eid naaseh dayan. So that's a kasha in our understanding of this line of ha'ana ha'Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Says the Gemara, don't worry. Kitanya hi kigon sherau belayla delo lemeba dina dininu. The case that happened in Bezdin was a different case altogether. That's a case where murder happened at night and you're not allowed to adjudicate at night, a totally different case. And another possible way to understand this line of ha'ana and ha'Rabbi Yossi Haglili, the Gemara says 2/3 of the way down, 6 lines before the wide lines, Ha'ana disfir like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. I hold like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the Amar Manah Tzuri, who says that Manah in our Mishna is talking about the larger Manah. And these are witnesses who saw you. Zil Havle Manah Tzuri, you should pay it. That's what is another explanation of this line. Says the Gemara, but if that's true, V'savar Rabbi Akiva de'ein eid naaseh dayan, based on what we learned earlier, it seemed that Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion pretty clearly of ein eid naaseh dayan. That's a problem, V'atanya, because Rabbi Akiva in the following rather lengthy brisa, it's about 8 lines, what the brisa we're about to learn, and then we'll get to our question. Let's learn the brisa, and then we'll circle back to what the question is against Rabbi Akiva. We know what we're looking for. We're taught that Rabbi Akiva says ein eid naaseh dayan, and now we're questioning that. The pasuk says that if I were to kill my friend with a stone or with my fist, Shimon HaTeimani Omer, Shimon HaTeimani, who was a Tana, he said, Ma egrof miyuchad shemasr le'edo le'edim. Just like my fist, you saw me with my fist, you saw me swinging my fist, and you saw its contact. So says the Gemara, Av kol shemasr le'edo le'edim, prat l'sheyatzisa mitachas yado edim. Therefore, anything that was used in a damage that the edim saw has to be brought to Bezdin, with the exception of those which was sheyatzisa mitachas yado edim, with the exception of those that we just can't get our hands on. But if someone's fist was used, then it has to be brought to Bezdin. Rabbi Akiva vehemently disagrees with this, as we will soon see. Second of the wide lines. Amar Rabbi Akiva, v'chi bifnei Bezdin hikau sheyodin kama hikau v'al ma hikau imal shoko o tzipar nafsho. Who cares if the guy's fist is in the room? Who cares? Do you know how he punched, how hard he punched, where he punched? Was it on the shok, which is the thigh, or was it on tzipar nafsho? Tzipar nafsho is the cartilage on the chest. Who cares if the guy's fist is in the room? It makes no sense. And furthermore, if my hands were the hands that pushed somebody off a roof and the person died, Bezdin holchen eitzel bira o bira holeches eitzel Bezdin. You have to see the thing that caused the death. You don't have to see the thing that caused the death. Ve'od im nafla chozer. If the building that he fell off of collapsed, do we have to rebuild the building to see what killed him? Shimon HaTeimani is being such a literalist, and Rabbi Akiva wants nothing to do with it. So the Gemara says, "Ela ma egrof miyuchad shu masr le'edim. Akol shu masr le'edim." It's just part of their edus. They just say, "I saw the egrof. I saw him throw his fist." With the exception of when a stone leaves a person's hand. So we don't have to actually bring it to Bezdin. We just bring in the testimony of the Eidim. Now, all of this is a front to ask the following question. Katani Mihas, 9 lines from the bottom. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, the Brisa said, V'chi mipnei Bezdin. V'chi bifnei Bezdin hiko shiyodin kama hiko. Are you standing in front of Bezdin when you bring the fist in, according to Shimon HaTeimani, when the culprit is there and he says, I hit him with this hand, and he shows his left fist. Just because Bezdin brought him in, do they know how hard he hit? What's implied from here? That ha'hiko bifneihem, that if in fact one did fight someone, throw a punch in front of Bezdin, then eid naaseh dayan. It's a diuk. The Gemara seems to say that we do have a principle of eid naaseh dayan. So how could Rabbi Akiva earlier 10 lines ago tell me ein eid naaseh dayan? Hare, we see a diuk in the Bryce over here that there is eid naaseh dayan. The Gemara says not a good question. L'dvar of the Rabbi Shimon HaTeimani kamer v'lei lo svir. Rabbi Akiva wasn't speaking in his own language. He was just talking in the language of Shimon HaTeimani. He was just saying, what do you mean, Shimon HaTeimani? How could you say that this is so? Doesn't make any sense. What, you think that Bezdin knows how hard he hit? So we tried to make a deal. See, Eid Naaseh. No, you can't make a deal of Eid Naaseh dayan. Rabbi Akiva was just pushing back on Shimon HaTeimani. Let's get a throwback to the earlier parts of the Masechta Tanu Rabbanan, that the 2 dots, 6 lines from the bottom of the page, a 2-part brisa. Part number 1, shortam shehemis v'hizik. You have a shore that is otherwise docile. It has not been established as a muad, and it killed and caused damage. It did 2 things. It killed someone and it caused damage to property. So if an animal that's a tam does these 2 things, it doesn't have both cases adjudicated for. Danan oso dine nefashos. We deal with the animal as it relates to the dine nefashos shabo. Ve'ein danan oso dine mamanas. However, we do not deal with the case of mamanas. We only deal with the fact that there was a death that took place. However, muad shehemis v'hizik, if an animal was considered dangerous, and it did a double crime, it killed and it damaged. So then, danan oso dine mamanis, first we adjudicate the monetary case, and then v'chozrim v'danan oso dine nefashos. And then we take care of the misa case. However, what if you broke the rules? Kadmo v'danuhu dine nefashos. If in fact, when in regards to the muad animal, you went out of order. Normally, you're supposed to adjudicate the mamanis case before the misa case. But if you went out of order, kadmo v'danuhu dine nefashos, you did the nefashos case first, then ein chozrin v'danan oso dine mamanis. Then you don't go back and adjudicate on the case of the money. Says the Gemara, kadmo v'danuhu dine nefashos ma'ihave. Who cares? The fact that you adjudicate the misa before the mammon, why would that stop you from taking care of the mamanis? What is one thing? It's not like kamle b'derabamine. We're not. That's not what you're not chayiv misa. You're the shore owner. You're not getting killed. So why would you pater yourself? Why would we say that if you've already dealt with the dinei nefashos component, namely that we're going to kill this animal, we're going to kill the shor hamuad? Why then can't you go back and discuss the mamanis piece? So it says the Gemara, "V'chikadmu v'dinu dinei nefashos ma'habe lehadar." You should go back uledaine nami mamanis. Why can't we go back and adjudicate both cases, both the Misa and the Mamanis? Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Ashkachtinu l'Rabbanon debei Rav. I saw the rabbis in the base medrash of Rav, the Yasve v'Ka'amre, and they said, Hamani, whose shita is this? Reb Shimon HaTeimani hui. This is Reb Shimon HaTeimani. Remember the Reb Shimon HaTeimani who said that I need the fist to show up in Bezdin, right? So here, the Amar Ma Egrof Miyuchad Shemaser Le'edu Le'edim, just like that person's fist is what caused damage and the Edim have to bring it. Alma, what do we see from here? Ba'inan umdina de Beidina. We need Bezdin to assess. But once we've established that this animal is Lamisa, it has no value. So how are you going to assess anything? Now that this animal has already been sentenced to death, there's nothing to do about it. He has no value anymore. So we're all done. Says the Gemara, he says that I retorted back to them. Rava is saying back to the people in the base medrash. Oh, that's a historical impossibility. How could a Rava have been around by the times of Rav? Oh, it's Rabba. That's the change on the side. Do you have a change there? Omar Rava. 2 lines from the bottom on Tzadi Amid Beis. It says, Omar Rava, Ashkachtinu l'Rabbanan debei Rav. Rava wasn't alive then. Do you have a change?
Nope.
It's Rabba. Rabba was 1 century earlier. Rava was not alive then. Rav was 1st century. This was 80 years later, 75, 80, 90 years later. So it had to be so. I have a change here on this one. It says, near the Tzarech Lomar Rabba. The Rashash caught this one. V'chein hu bekisvei yad. To see, the Ozvahadar is not so bad. All right, so that's what the Gemara says. Anyways, v'amina luhu ana, 3 lines, 4 lines down on the top of Tzadi Aleph Amar Aleph, Rabba says back to them, Afilu tema Rabbi Akiva. I could even argue that all of this works according to Rabbi Akiva, namely, that once the Dinei Nefashos case is done for a muad animal, we will not go back and deal with the Dinei Mamanis case. Where somebody ran away. That's what Rashi says on the 3rd line, Shabarach, Bailov. So the Bailim ran away, says the Gemara. That's a case where Rabbi Akiva would also agree that once the Misa case was adjudicated, we will no longer adjudicate the monetary case. It's not understood simply, but rather by creating a nukimta to say that the Bailim ran away. Says the Gemara, Ibarach, if the owners ran away, kilo danuhu dine nefashos, how could you adjudicate anything without Bailim? Says the Gemara, Dekabil Sadeh Ubarach. First, witnesses came to say what the animal did, and then they ran away. Says the Gemara, Sof Sof Mehecha Mishtale. Okay, but like, how is the payment going to take place without Bailim? How can we collect any money if the Bailim ran away? Says the Gemara, because we have their animal that killed. Their animal that killed the Shor Muad. Okay, we have to keep him on a tight leash, but we can use him meridia. We can use him for plowing, which was like the most basic function of a cow back in the day. Sometimes we think of cows as meat, Romanian, but they did eat meat as well, of course, but if they had a cow, it was less about the food and more about the plowing. So the way that the way that the victim who was killed can collect money in the absence of the Bailim is meridia, is by taking from a plow. Says the Gemara, Hachi, if that's true, then why only in the case of a muad are we collecting money? Tam, in the case of a docile animal that killed, then why don't we use the tam animal to pay off the victim? Why are we not using that? Says the Gemara, why don't we do that? And then why is it that the Bryce at the bottom said that when it comes to an animal that's tam, even if the animal did both misa and hezek, we're only concerned about din and nefashos? Because the Gemara says, and this is a throwback to the earlier parts of the Masechta, and with this we'll close. Amar of Mari Bereder of Kana Zosomeres Ridya, the use of an animal is begeder aliyah, of the higher properties, demarahu. And if you'll recall, a tam is paid migufo. When a tam causes damage, the tam is the payment. But when a muad causes damage, it's paid from minha aliyah. So if this is a case of tam, we can't be paid. You can't pay from aliyah. You have to pay from gufo. But there is no gufo in this case. So the Gemara says ridya is the same as aliyah, and that's why the Brisa writes that if there's a tam who damages both with Misa and with Hezek, we only deal with him in regards to Misa, but not with Mamanis. We'll stop right here at the two dots. Emir Hashem, tomorrow night we'll pick up at Iboya Lahu, about 12 lines down or so on Sadi Aleph Amad Aleph. We have a lot of ground to cover tomorrow night. We probably won't finish it, but we'll get to wherever we get to. Wishing you all a beautiful night.